and our men and women in uniform. The military is not a thing. It's a group of committed patriots willing to sacrifice everything on our behalf. It works only because of the people in it. As cool as the hardware is, and we got cool hardware, as cool as the machines and weapons and satellites are, ultimately it comes down to remarkable people. Some of them a lot closer to Malia's age than mine or Michelle's. Well, the same thing's true for our democracy. Our democracy is not the buildings. It's not the monuments. It's you being willing to work to make things better and being willing to listen to each other and argue with each other and come together and knock on doors and make phone calls and treat people with respect. And that doesn't end. This is just a little pit stop. This is not a period, this is a comma in the continuing story of building America. So, to all of you that have put your heart and soul not just into our campaigns, but into making schools better, making sure our veterans got the care they needed, making sure that we left behind a planet that is safe and secure for our kids, making sure that hardworking people had a ladder of opportunity and could support families. For all of you who have just done amazing, remarkable work, most of it unheralded, most of it without fanfare, most of it without you getting any word of thanks, we could not be prouder of you. I could not be prouder of you. This has been the privilege of my life, and I know I speak for Michelle as well. We look forward to continuing this journey with all of you, and I can't wait to see what you do next. And I promise you I'll be right there with you. All right? God bless you. Thank you, everybody. Yes, we did. Yes, we can. God bless America.
Former President Obama at Joint Base Andrews preparing to leave for his vacation in Palm Springs. This is a split screen kind of day, and as we have been listening to the former president's remarks, we have been watching the new president, Donald Trump, affixing his name to a number of orders. It's mostly housekeeping things. For example, General James Mattis, who has been nominated to be Secretary of Defense, needed a waiver because, according to the law, you have to be out of the military a certain number of years before you can serve as Secretary of Defense, a civilian post. And General Mattis needed a waiver from the president in order to be able to do that because he hasn't been out of uniform the requisite period of time. He's speaking to the leader of the Democrats right now, Nancy Pelosi, the leader of the Democrats in the House. He's also signed a proclamation that names a National Day of Patriotism. So nothing momentous here so far, but a number of housekeeping items and symbolic items that the 45th President of the United States, that signature you're seeing right there, has now become the signature of the President, and he will be going off to this luncheon that we've been describing to you shortly.
It's a tough group of people here. They're learning the hard way.
Exactly. Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, on the right side of the screen wearing the blue tie there. and of course the new Vice President, Mike Pence, on the left.
It's a rough grip, isn't it?
It is. I'm happy to take
Next. I think we're going to need some more pens, by the way.
These are also, we are told, the formal nominations for each member of his cabinet. Now, all of those members of the cabinet, or at least many of them over the last week or so, have already been in their confirmation hearings before the U.S. Senate. So this is some of that paperwork that Donald Trump has campaigned against in Washington, having to make those nominations official with the signature of the president. The paperwork begins.
Everyone's stuck.
Now, Bob Schieffer, everyone is smiles in this picture. We see the Democratic leader, Senator Schumer, is laughing and smiling with that pen in his hand. Nancy Pelosi laughing and smiling. They're not going to be getting along with Donald Trump on everything, and not his own party either.
Well, that was what was so remarkable about this speech that he made, where he did not make any attempt at all to reach across the aisle, but even more surprising, any attempt really to reach to his own party. I mean, this in many ways, Scott, it was not a victory for the Republican Party. It was a victory by Donald Trump. I remember going up to Capitol Hill just before the Republican convention, and I couldn't find a single leader of the Republicans in the Senate who thought that he was going to win. I went, as we all did, out to the Republican convention. They were still talking about how can we save the majority in the Senate. Nobody thought that they were going to win. So they're still kind of getting over the surprise of the election, and I think that just adds to the kind of as Nancy Cordes said, the sort of shell-shocked reaction to the speech.
The president's granddaughter has a federal job, apparently, as the passer of the pens. And you may wonder why so many pens. Well, it's not because the president is running out of ink. It is a Washington tradition that the president takes a pen, signs a document, and hands it as a gift to one of his supporters or perhaps a sponsor of legislation. And so a lot of pens get used and a lot of pens handed out as gifts from the President of the United States.
Lyndon Johnson was very good at that. And when he signed the Civil Rights Act, he gave the first pen to Everett Dirksen, who was the leader of the Republicans. And his daughter Lucy told me later, she said, "Why did you do that, Dad?" He said, "Because if I hadn't had Dirksen with me, we'd have legislation. Now we have a law." These are valued souvenirs.
Let's bring in Anthony Mason. Anthony, as you watch this scene, what do you make of all of this?
Well, I was struck by what you referred to before, Scott, which is how chummy everybody looks today, and you realize it's not going to last long. This may be the best we see. I mean, and I was also struck in that speech of what a kind of apocalyptic economic landscape the president described. Factories scattered like tombstones, and by implication blaming basically everybody on that podium.
Everybody in Washington.
Everybody in Washington, all the former presidents who were sitting there, the Republican leaders who were sitting there, and I was struck. It was the speech not of a politician, but of an executive, a CEO who's used to being able to order things to change, and it will be interesting to see how he responds to the way Washington works, looking forward. I was struck by a quote in the paper from former Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson, who of course was a former CEO, came to Washington to work in the Bush administration, and he said, "You succeed in Washington by collaborating."
I remember asking Donald Trump in an interview for 60 Minutes if he understood that being President of the United States is not being CEO of the President of the United States, that Congress would have a say and the Supreme Court would have a say. And he said to me, quote, "We'll see," end quote.
Well, presidents succeed by persuading,
Yes.
not ordering. And that's the difference. So how many people have come to Washington and say, we'll run it like a business?
Yeah.
Well, it's not a business.
Alex Wagner, Anthony's co-host on CBS This Morning, Saturday. What are your thoughts after watching the speech and seeing the former president departing?
Well, it is indeed a different tone in that room than it was on the stage, Scott. I was struck by the dystopian nature that everyone, I think, has mentioned at this point. I was also struck by the fact that we keep talking about populism. At one point, the president said, on January 20th of 2017, it will be remembered as the day the people became the rulers of this nation again. That's certainly a message we heard on the campaign trail. But as it concerns the very people that President Trump is putting in his cabinet, this is the richest cabinet perhaps in American history. And I think there will be a real question about how much of his agenda is truly geared to the people of this nation. It'll be interesting to see these cabinet confirmations as they proceed. We know Chuck Schumer has announced that General Mattis and General John Kelly are likely to be confirmed for defense and homeland security.
And confirmed today, maybe within hours.
Exactly. And on Monday, Mike Pompeo for the CIA.
So they're getting the national security team in first.
Indeed.
And in terms of the Secretary of Defense, at least, they're going to try to get that done today. Donald Trump is now going to go into the luncheon. It's a private luncheon. We won't be able to see what's happening there. He did ask his staff at one point whether he could skip the luncheon and go straight to the White House and go to work. But the luncheon's been held in every inauguration for about 100 years, and they decided that that was perhaps a tradition that he shouldn't break. That's Statuary Hall in the Capitol, where the luncheon will commence shortly. And then after the luncheon, after about an hour or so, the president will head down Pennsylvania Avenue toward the White House. It'll be a long procession, probably will walk part of the way if history is any guide. It was supposed to rain all day in Washington, and it is dark and cloudy, but we don't see any rain coming down just at the moment, and it's about 44 degrees, so it's fairly pleasant out there, and we would expect the new president and first lady to walk part of the way down Pennsylvania Avenue. That is the White House, of course, the North Lawn, and you can't quite see it, but at the bottom of your screen there's an enormous reviewing stand that has been built right there on the part of Pennsylvania Avenue that crosses in front of the White House, 1800 Pennsylvania, and that's where the parades will be going through. The president and the first lady and other dignitaries will be watching a number of parades going by well into the afternoon. This may be, watch carefully, the last moment of friendship and comity among the Democrats and Republicans in the Capitol. This is a historic moment and one that should not be missed. There's the former governor of Texas who has been nominated to be Secretary of Energy.
I think we probably ought to point out that that speech really was directed at the people who voted for Donald Trump.
And no one else.
And yes, but as we saw throughout the campaign, people kept saying you've got to broaden your appeal. He instead simply doubled down on the people who were with him from the beginning, and I think that's probably. The folks that like him, they're going to love that speech.
Well, the inauguration...
But it's not going to make it any easier for him to get anything done, because you can't just decide I'm going to do this or that in Washington. You have to get help, number one, from your own party, and then you're going to need some help across the aisle.
Inauguration speeches are almost always about binding the wounds that were created in the election. And you did not hear very much of that today.
No.
And what's interesting is there was perhaps the suggestion from President Trump's top advisors this would be a speech about magnanimity, about a speech for the American public on a whole, not just the electorate that put him into office. One wonders to what degree they truly have the president's ear in a moment.
You know, Alex, that's it.
Our
It was always
coverage
before
of
the
Inauguration
speeches, that's what
Day
they
will
said.
continue here on CBS in just a moment.